Hello. Okay, so I'm Josh Smith. I work for Codethink, a software services company, and I'm here to talk about how we can test the implementations of the remote execution API. So primarily for those who don't work with the remote cache or the remote execution services, Bazel's remote execution API was released and is an open standard for communicating between build clients like Bazel or BuildStream to tools like RBE, BuildBarn, BuildFarm, and BuildGrid. But other than the API, which is a written piece of documentation, how do we know that these kind of work together and communicate as the API would determine? So when we came together for this, we decided that we wanted to test a few things, one being compatibility. So the goal is to test that for each of the build clients that you implement and each of the servers that you implement, they can communicate and do a full build of a certain test project together. This is not exhaustive and doesn't test all of the functionality, but the goal is that we can catch most things out, and if we miss something, then hopefully implement that in a further fix. We also want to test performance, so it's interesting to see how the different build clients and the build servers go up against each other. Currently, we only have performance implemented for Bazel. However, we are hoping to change this in the future. Setting up pipelines. So the goal for this was how do we test this in an easy way that anyone can contribute to, and hopefully people working on these clients or server implementations can add their own implementations to be tested. So we set up a GitLab project with some CI built in, so that all it does is spin up based on your based on sort of a defined set of I can't find the word. So the goal is that you define some configs for your client and your server. You test these. They run on CI with Terraform, Kubernetes. We run a hosted service in AWS for each of the backends. So we use EKS. We spin up BuildBarn, BuildFarm, BuildGrid. We currently don't have RBE in the pipeline. Obviously, this wouldn't be hosted on AWS, but we don't have this at all due to it being in closed alpha. And this runs once a week, and the goal is that we can easily review the different compatibilities. So how do we do this? So I said that we have some basic tests. The most basic test here is to check that they work together. So you spin up a client and a server instance, and you build a small project. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Bazel. It's an open source project which is quite small and can be built quite quickly. This just checks that they work together. So the pipeline pulls in Bazel or BuildBarn or whatever, Bazel or BuildStream or whatever build client you're using, builds Bazel against the defined server implementation, and then displays pass or fail on the wiki. For compatibility matrix, we have BuildStream and Rec, which is alternatives to Bazel for a build system that is compatible with the remote execution API. There are quite a few others. We're hoping that people will add them. We haven't got around to adding all of them. There are quite a few. But even with just this compatibility matrix alone, it's interesting to see how not everything is as compatible as we'd like with the API. Obviously, some things are missing, some functionality is missing between the different server and client implementations, and most people haven't tested it with the systems that they don't use. But if you wanted to switch, there would be things missing. So for performance testing, as I said, we've only done this with Bazel. There are a few reasons for this, but primarily we've chosen to build a single project. So we build Bazel as our performance test. Bazel being quite a large project and having quite a long-ish build time without lots of resources. We build Bazel with BuildFarm, with the different server implementations using Bazel. Hopefully, we can eventually move on to building Bazel with BuildStream and Rec, but we haven't got that currently. And this records the end-to-end build times, which is what we currently use as our main performance metric, because it's quite easy to review this as it changes over time. But we also monitor some other things. So we've started monitoring gRPC tracing. So this isn't quite easy to just scan over a table of results. But So gRPC tracing is the idea that when you're doing these remote execution calls, you're communicating over gRPC, and Build Barn has functionality implemented into part of it, but not all of it, for tracking these different processes and allowing you to see how long certain parts take. We were hoping that we could work to implement this in other backends, because this would allow us to have more information when debugging issues. But that's not done yet. So further reading, there's a blog post that goes on about this that was published in the Bazel blog. It goes into detail about how the project was started and how we've got so far. This is a few months old at this point. And there's a few things that we'd like to do, and this comes with help from the community. We can't get it all done with the current workforce. So there's a great start. Performance analysis, we've got that. We don't have everything. So we're currently monitoring CPU and memory usage. We could do with more. So one thing we can work towards doing is monitoring the individual. For example, with Bazel, we can monitor the actions and how long individual actions take. We'd like to test other things like API correctness. We don't currently have that. There's been discussions, but this is quite a lot of work to check that the individual implementations are doing exactly what the API say. We're currently doing it via comparing one against the other, but who's to say that either of them are correct? That's something that is currently in the air. And obviously adding the clients and the server implementations, but that's down to desire to be added. We've got the main ones implemented. If anyone else has any server implementations that they'd like to propose adding, we'd be appreciative if you could open an issue, maybe suggest examples to look at to add those, or even add it yourself if you've got the free time. And for RBE, with it being in closed alpha, I don't think we're going to have that added anytime soon. But hopefully, eventually, we can compare its compatibility with BuildStream and other clients. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah. You.
First is, are you allowed to spoil it by showing us what the compatibility grid looks like today? Or do we have to go look on the web ourselves?
This is more of a question of this setup right here. Can I?
No, that's fine if you can. The second was, you said that you picked like one of the smallest open source projects you could use for this.
Yes.
Wouldn't choosing like the most hairy, large, painful one you can find be more likely to reveal weaknesses and problems and differences?
Yes, I guess that's kind of what the performance test does, and it also double checks the compatibility, but obviously, like I said, that's only currently Bazel. The downside to that is obviously your CI jobs end up running for a lot longer, and during development cycles of people working on this project, it slows you down massively, and you question how much you're going to flush out from changing that. So I would open the slide, but I'm not too sure on the current setup. But feel free to take a look. It's on the homepage of the GitLab. Yeah.
For performance testing, one question is, did you need to do any performance tuning of the backend? And second is, what's the scale you're testing at? Do you spin up 10 workers, 100 workers?
So the first question was, how do we test the performance of the backends? The performance of the backends is primarily judged by comparing the different front ends against the backends, but obviously we don't have multiple front ends right now. The hope is to implement those. So right now we can't directly compare, other than build times, which it's using Bazel, so you should be able to say that this backend takes a lot longer than this backend. Something's going on, and you'd have to dive into that. We have CPU and memory graphs that maybe could link towards something, but there's not fine-tuned metrics. And for your second question, which was, sorry, scale. So we only deploy, I think it's 2 instances. It's not much for every CI job. So the worker runs locally, and if it's Build Barn, for example, you run all of the different services on a Kubernetes cluster, and I think it's 2 nodes. Obviously, you can run several images, Docker images in those as pods in Kubernetes. So for Build Barn, we set up the compatibility with different concurrency. There's one worker with different concurrency. I think Build Farm does a similar thing. Build Grid doesn't. But that's detailed in the tables. It mentions what the concurrency is set for each of those to try and give you some comparison.
Is it quick? Because we're over. Okay, please.
Which version of Bazel do you use? That's the latest and greatest, or?
It's usually changing to the latest greatest. Someone usually opens an issue and says, can we change this? And then someone spends 10 minutes upgrading it and then seeing if it runs. So I think currently we're on 1.1. I'm not sure exactly. Yeah, it's pinned. So you have to go in and change it in the code.